Good morning, number 3. This is the third time I've tried recording this morning. In fact, I just gave this sermon to myself without pressing the record button. So I'm going to give it another try and see how we do this morning. And I want to begin by saying hello to folks. I miss the South Country Church. This is the second Sunday we've missed getting together. I've missed the folks, our young adults group. I missed that group and the Saturday morning and Thursday noon men's group. So Shirley's the only one who has to put up with all my yapping. I still do just as much yapping, but Shirley's the one who has to listen to it all now, and it doesn't spread out across the community. But today I want to talk about attitude, and I want to talk about different attitudes. Attitude is so important. We need to guard, we need to be very careful at this time as we are self-isolating and we're in our homes and we can't get out and we can't travel and we can't go downtown easily, and we've got to be careful. And it's good to see people being very careful. But our attitudes can slip very easily. Our attitudes can become one of discouragement. It can become one of boredom. And boredom is not a word I like. Boredom is, I tend to think it's a self-centered word that suggests I need to be entertained. I've got to get, people need to, there's got to be more things happening. Boredom, I never get bored. There's always something to do. There's books, there's videos, there's TV. There's so much to do. And boredom is one of those attitudes. And there's all kinds of other attitudes, including this one, grumbling. Grumbling. And it's so easy to slip into complaining and grumbling at this time of our process as we go through this COVID crisis. Grumbling. So I want to bring up two stories about grumbling from the Bible. The first one is Moses. And Moses, after he leads his people, they were enslaved in Egypt. They were doing mundane tasks of working for Pharaoh. And finally, Moses gets to release them. The Pharaoh releases them, and Moses gets to lead his people. And they move down to the Sinai, and they get across. The Red Sea opens up, miraculous. And all the people manage to get through the Red Sea before it comes crashing in on the Egyptian army. It's an amazing story. But when they get into the Sinai, the people start grumbling. They start saying, oh, the food isn't very good. The water, we can't get good water. So God provides them water. God provides them manna from heaven, and then quail, meat from heaven. But they still grumble. And they start saying, oh, I wish I'd gone back. Can't we go back to Egypt? I mean, it was tough, but it's not like this. Grumbling. Missing out on how God had blessed them. And so God led them to the point where they're outside the promised land. And they're ready to go into this land of milk and honey that they had heard of. They'd thought about it and they'd heard of it. And there it was in front of them. So Moses takes 10 of his people, spies, and they enter the land and they check it out. And they find out it is everything that they've heard about. It's a land of milk and honey. It's overflowing with opportunities. It's a whole new life. And so they come back out, and 2 of them are really enthused, Joshua and Caleb. But the other 8 spies, 80% of the spies, say it's a good place, but there's giants in the land, and we're afraid of the giants. And they started complaining about these, how are we going to overcome these giants? We'll never be able to do it. And because of that, those people did not get to go into the promised land. They were held back from the whole new life. and grumbling. And in a sense, many of us are Christians are like that. We are saved from our bondage. I know people who have been saved from a life of gambling or alcohol or all kinds of difficulties, drugs, and they get out and they get through that. They get through their life that is so mundane. And they're given a new opportunity, so they go through their Red Sea experience, but they never quite fully trust God. The giants in the land, the things that they look at and say, it's just too big for me. They're afraid to move in. They're afraid to trust in God. The second story about grumbling we find in John chapter 6. And in John chapter 6, verse 66, John chapter 6, it talks about Jesus feeding the people. And this is the second time. They had gone to, the people, thousands of people had come out, and Jesus was talking to them, and they got hungry. So a boy with fish and loaves Jesus provided this amazing meal. And so this is a couple weeks or a week later, and they're meeting again, and there's thousands of people out there. Now, why did they go out to see Jesus? Well, Jesus himself says this. He says, he said, I tell you the truth, you are looking for me, not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. The people came out the second time not to hear Jesus, but to be fed. This is a great opportunity. It's like fast food. It's like Costco. It's like, whoa, this is going to be great. We're going to get fed. And so their mind was on physical bread. Feed me, Lord. Feed me bread. So Jesus starts talking about bread, but he's talking about the living bread. And then it becomes eating my body, the bread of life. And people they're a little skeptical, and they're wondering what's going on here. And Jesus was trying to teach them spiritual truth. And what happens is they were hungry. And they say in verse 34, Sir, from now on give us the bread, thinking physical bread. Verse 41, at this time the Jews began to grumble about him because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They started to grumble. And then in verse 52, then the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? And then one of the saddest passages in the Bible, I think, is verse 66 of chapter 6 of John. I call it the 666 Bible passage. And it says, from this time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Their grumbling led to arguing, led to division, led to their desertion from the faith. Their desertion, these are the disciples. Some of the disciples left and never, it says here, they turned their back and no longer followed him. That's one of the problems of grumbling. Not only does grumbling lead to fear, and grumbling lead to a belief that God cannot provide, grumbling also leads to our missing out on the spiritual truth that God wants to teach us. See, when we are so focused on the world and the things of this world, things like our physical needs, things like our pleasure, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, when we're so focused on that, we miss out on all that God wants to give us. So how are we to look at grumbling? Grumbling is the problem. What God wants is not grumbling. He wants humbling. He wants us to realize he is big enough to handle our problems. He is big enough to handle our future. We can trust in God to lead us into the promised land. Now that promised land may not be everything we want. There may be difficulty, but there is hope, and there is a future, and there is an inheritance. And all of that comes through humbling, recognizing, for me, it means recognizing I don't have all the answers. I cannot figure out God. I don't know his ways. I don't understand why this virus is hitting people, but I do know that God has a plan. And I want to enter into life with his plan, not being afraid of the giants of the land. One of the huge giants of the land right now is suffering and death. Suffering and death. That may be the beginning of the promised land. That may. And we have to think about that. So our attitudes are so important. Our attitude. What is going to be your attitude? Well, I trust that your attitude will not be one of grumbling. We have an opportunity now to transform attitude into gratitude. Now, I know this word is added an extra T in here somewhere, but the point is this, to be thankful. Now, how can you be thankful when you're cooped up and you can't get around and you're limited in your mobility and you can't see your friends and socializing is so different now? How can that possibly be good? Well, I want to tell you a little story about a 12-year-old boy in Uganda. His name is Simon. Simon was playing at Kimi's office one day, playing soccer, and he broke his leg. And Kimi rushed him into Children's Hospital in Jinja, and the orthopedic surgeon came and they took an x-ray, and sure enough it was broken, and the surgeon said he would work on it and they would fix it up. But that was, so what they did is they put him in a bed in the hospital there, and the Children's Hospital, good people who work there, but the conditions are terrible, and the beds are old, and they're crowded together, and the guardians sleep on the concrete floor underneath, and so Kimi gets Simon into this bed. They don't provide sheets, bed sheets, so Kimi had to provide the bed sheets. They don't provide food, so Kimi and others had to bring him food every day. They don't provide much in the way of service, and so Kimi had to even go out and get a bedpan. They had no bedpan, so she went all through the city of Jinja looking for a bedpan to buy, couldn't find one, ended up with a bowl, and that's what he used, because he was in this bed. They put a board and they tied it to the ceiling. They put a board on the bed, and they put his leg on that board, and he was like that for 5, 6, I think it may have been 7 days. He was stationary. He never grumbled. He never complained. Finally, what happened is Kimi got fed up with the whole situation and took him out of the hospital, took him to Kampala, about 3 hours away, and they did surgery on Simon, and he recovered, and he's fine now. But my point is this. When I was in hospital, I never dared complain about the food or the conditions. I never complained about the discomfort or anything, because I thought of Simon. I thought of, wow, if this young boy could go through all of that without grumbling, I can do the same. So Simon was my inspiration. I called it being Simonized. I dared not grumble. What can you do now that you are in this spot where you're confined to your house and you can't do much, and you have to be very careful, and I trust you are being careful, but you can't meet with people like you normally would? How can you be grateful in a situation like that? Well, there's so much you can do. You can encourage people. You can phone them. You can email them. There's even something that us old folks remember, something called writing a letter and using the postal service. And that's still a possibility. You can get out and you can learn about God on on Netflix and TV nowadays, there's so many wonderful documentaries about God, about his creation, about amazing animals, amazing insects. You can learn about the universe. You can learn about God. There's sermons on the internet. There are teachings. There's so many ways to be grateful in this time. In addition to that, you think about other people. Right now, there are people confined not to just to their houses. I've got all this room in this house. There are people who are in motel rooms where there's 2 beds and a microwave oven and a bathroom, and they might be sharing that with 2 or 3 others. And that's it. Maybe a mini fridge, and that's it. There are people who are homeless. They have nothing. They don't have a TV. They don't have the internet. I am so grateful at this time. It helps me realize how much I've been given. There are people, seniors, who are in their homes right now. Be grateful for what you have. Be grateful that you can use this time to get to know your God. That is so wonderful. So keep in mind a humble attitude is so important. A humble attitude. And that is what we seek as we trust in God through this time. So consider that, and may you be encouraged. And I look forward to talking to you again, Lord willing, sometime in the future.